Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming and joining us here at the Tippie College of Business for our career webinar today. My name is Barb Thomas, and I oversee communications and alumni relations at the Tippie College of Business. And before we begin our event today, I actually want to welcome our new dean, Amy Christoph Brown, who is here for a welcome. I'll turn it over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Barb. This is exciting. I know we have a lot of people in the audience today. This is a great topic that everybody is always interested in, particularly at a time when people have been going through lots of different career opportunities, let's frame them that way, over the last year and a half or so. So you have a terrific opportunity today to learn from Dee Hurst about salary negotiations. Thank you for joining our webinar series. This is our new career webinar series that we've just started this year with great opportunities for you to continue to tap into our career expertise here in the Tippie College. We have lots of good opportunities to do so. We have a great topic coming up on April 28th about using Handshake, which is, if you haven't heard of it before, it's kind of the latest and greatest way that employers advertise their positions, and we connect them up with students and alums. Many people don't realize that our alumni have access to use this, but you do. So join us on April 28th for some additional information on how to make Handshake work for you. And I hope that Barb will also tell you a little bit about some of our other webinars, not just focused on career, but also focused on different topics such as the business of sports, the business of entertainment, and then other webinars that really focus and showcase on our faculty expertise. So we've expanded our offerings greatly over the last year. Thanks very much to Barb and her communications team for allowing us to be with you over the lunch hour and sharing some of these topics with you. So thank you for joining us today.
Great, thanks so much, Amy. Yes, if you enjoy what you're seeing today, we're going to give you lots of opportunity to participate in other sessions. And actually, the next opportunity is tomorrow. And so tomorrow we are actually holding the last session of the Tippie Women's Summit webinar series. And this session tomorrow will specifically be about women who helped shape the University of Iowa. So we will have an expert from the University of Iowa Libraries, specifically from the women's collection, who will come and provide that additional information. We also have a faculty webinar coming up in April as well. I think it's early to mid-April. Sorry, I don't have the date, but that will feature Stephen Courtwright, one of our faculty members, and it will be talking about toxic leadership and what you can do to deal with that. So again, another wonderful webinar. And then we will continue the career webinar series at the end of April, on April 28th, on that session about Handshake. And in this session, you'll learn kind of what is Handshake, which it's this big online system. Over 500,000 employers use Handshake. And so, but many alumni don't know that they can actually have an account on Handshake. And so in this webinar, you're going to find out about Handshake. You're going to find out how you can get an account, but then in addition, there'll be some of our career experts that will help you figure out how do you search for a job that requires a little bit more experience than an entry-level job. So great programming. If you are an alum of the Tippie College, you're getting our emails, so that's how you can always sign up. But you can always go to the Tippie College's alumni webpage where we have all of these events listed. Now, again, all of our webinars are free to the public and they are open to everyone. Of course, we want our alums, but if you have a friend or a colleague who would like to get that same type of information, we really welcome you. Share the registration information. We would prefer that they register themselves rather than you just share your Zoom link. That gives us a more accurate idea of how many people are actually attending our events. So again, open to the public, feel free to share the information, the more the merrier. Now, before we start our event today, I do want to go over a few simple little housekeeping tools or tips. So you are actually in a Zoom webinar, not in a Zoom meeting. And so things are just a little bit different with that. And so what you will notice is that there are two buttons, one for chat and one for Q&A. Now, the chat is different than it is in a normal Zoom meeting. You cannot chat with each other, but you can send a chat that will either go to all panelists or to all panelists and everyone. Automatically, your camera and your microphone are muted, and we have that separate Q&A button. And so what I would recommend is that if you have a question for our speaker, please go into that Q&A button, type in your question and hit enter, and then we will try to get to as many of those questions as we can at the end of our session today. Now, lastly, you may have noticed that we have enabled the live transcription feed. And you might not want to see all of those words pop up at the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to tell you how you can get rid of it. So at the bottom of your screen, you probably see a More button with 3 dots. Click on that, and you should be given the option to hide subtitles. In addition, if you do like the subtitles and you'd like them to be larger, you can go to subtitle settings, and that will give you the option to increase the size. Now, please know, all of the transcriptions are done automatically. In other words, we don't really know for sure if they're going to spell Tippie the way we spell Tippie. So just know that it's automatically generated and it is only in English. So now we can move on to our program. So it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Dee Hurst. Dee currently serves as the Director of Career Management for the Tippie College's part-time professional programs. She previously served as the college's Director of Human Resources. Dee has worked for both the University of Iowa and Iowa State University in career services roles, directing their efforts for business and liberal arts students. She began her higher education career as a program assistant in minority student affairs at Iowa State, and also interned at the Iowa House of Representatives for the Speaker of the House. Dee holds a BA in Economics and Political Science and an MS in Student Development from Iowa State University. She is certified in business etiquette and has presented on a variety of career and management topics to professionals in higher education, business, and in government. Now, some interesting factoids about Dee. She has been quoted in the Wall Street Journal. I can't say that, can you? And she is also an avid dog lover. Specifically, she has taken in a number of rescue Brittany Spaniels. And in fact, her dog, Cody, won the Tippie College's Pet Halloween contest just this past year. So with those tidbits, I will then turn it over to our speaker. Please join me in welcoming Dee Hurst. Dee?
Great to have everybody here. Let's get some screens up and get started today. Well, you heard a lot about my background, but I'm going to tell you a little story from my very first day as an undergrad in a big economics class. It was a macro class, and I remember the professor coming in with a t-shirt that said, "Economics, common sense made difficult." And I knew that was going to be my kickoff to a line that I would continue to use over the years, because we're going to talk about some common sense approaches to looking at salary negotiations. It doesn't have to be difficult, but it's probably going to be a little more complex than some of you think about. So let's take a look at the word negotiation and just kind of visualize what you think that means to you. You know, we've got that picture of the guy with a lot of money in front of him and boxing gloves on. We have another picture where we're focused a little bit more on a more friendly approach. And so usually I'll start working with my students and I'll say, you know, what is it you want to get out of the negotiation? What image do you have? And, you know, they're saying, hey, I work really hard and I want to get more money. So what are going to be the steps that I can do to go through that? And so today's program, albeit brief, we're going to do a quick review, is going to talk a little bit about what some of those focus areas are. You know, I call it the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 theory, because 5 things you can do before that conversation. And if people ask me, what's, you know, Barb, what's the biggest mistake people make in salary negotiation? Far and away, the single biggest mistake is not preparing, not doing a little homework, not getting some facts in place. So, you know, 8 out of 10 recruiters are willing to negotiate. 8 out of 10. So when you don't negotiate, you could be leaving money on the table. 4 tips from the other side is going to lean heavily on the fact that I've been on the HR side of that negotiation. So let's think a little bit about what their point of view is going to be at. Some core concepts are going to be more an idea of what you can do some further research on. So we're not going to get too deep into that. Timing and tone is critical, and I'll save the number 1 for last. So should you negotiate your salary? Absolutely. 75% of the workers who asked for a raise received it, according to payscale.com. So those are some numbers that are in your favor. But I think the other mistake people sometimes make is they're very, very oriented toward that first salary negotiation, and they don't realize this is going to be a skill you're going to use throughout your career. You are going to be using it when you have evolution in your job and you're doing more. You're going to be using it internally if you're looking at a promotion. You're going to be using it externally as you think about making a move to a different type of organization. The main reason employees aren't paid what they're worth isn't because they don't deserve it. It's because they don't ask. So let's think about how you can get a lot more confident in the ask. My biggest concern, any of you, I hope some of you out there in January saw the Nick Westergaard thing where we talked about how fear-inducing public speaking is. I'm going to go out on a limb and say negotiating a salary is going to be right up there. It's something that if we have any opportunity to dodge, we're just going to skip it. So let's talk a little bit about why people don't negotiate. They may have an uncertainty about the market. So let's start on the left. They don't know what they're worth. I think I know what I'm worth. This is what I'm getting paid. Is that low? Is that high? Where am I at? Low goals, meaning, I have other things that are my priority. I'm going to worry about my salary later. Little negotiation training. That's where we're going to get some tips for you today that I hope will be takeaways and you can further investigate later on. And I think the biggest one, and sometimes I fold that into this kind of Iowa nice theory, the view that conflict is bad, the view that if I start to negotiate, they're not going to like me. They're going to think I'm high maintenance. They're going to take away the offer. So there's a lot of fear going on. All of these are fixable to one degree or another. So we're going to concentrate a little bit more on you not being that 18% of people that never negotiate. I don't even want you to be within that 44% of people who occasionally negotiate. Let's move those percentages up to where you're comfortable negotiating when the appropriate time is there. So when I said there's 5 things you do pre-visit, pre-talking about negotiation or that conversation with your boss or manager or hiring agency, you need to get to your why. And those of you that have heard me before, why is a big fundamental for me, because when motivation gets low, I circle back to my why. Now I put salary first because for the most part, we're interested in getting fair pay for fair work. But you're going to notice a few other visuals on here, and that's why it's going to be really important for you to understand there's more to this conversation than only salary. So when you think about salary, let's do a what if example, and let's pretend you're an internal auditor and you think you're getting paid pretty well. You've checked out the market, you're in that range, you're maybe even a little on the high range, and you see a few discrepancies in your job. You take them to your boss at your next performance review, you get another pretty good raise. So you're in a pretty comfortable place with your salary right now. So you might be thinking, I don't need to have the salary negotiation. But what I want you to imagine is, what if that company were Enron? What if that company is paying you well, so your salary needs are being met, but look at the far right, are your ethics, are your accountability, are your principles? What do you value? How's your continuing education plan? What's your family? How about working on a team or working for a manager that's going to support and build your long-term goal? So I know it sounds a little simplistic, but it's a lot more than just the salary. So step 1, get to your why you're going to be wanting to step down and look at this conversation. The biggest part of your time is going to be on this step 2, and that is before the conversation. You need to assess your value proposition. So start with your job duties. When I said I'm going to talk about some top mistakes that I used to see in not preparing, one was, but Dee, I work really hard, right? And I'll nod. And I said, I do know you work really hard. And I'm really loyal. And I'll nod. And I'll say, I know you're really loyal. So I need money and I need it right now because my car just broke down. I'm getting a divorce and things are out of control. And I think I deserve to get a raise. Okay, we're going to step back 3 steps from that panic moment. We're going to start looking at the job duties and any changes and shifts since you started. So step one is going to be, what are you actually doing? And for most of this, it could look really different than what we were necessarily hired for. How can those differences or evolutions work in your favor? What are you taking off the back of other team members or your manager that now allows them to further explore doing higher level skills? And are you being rewarded for that? Competencies and deliverables. And I'm going to give you a really important piece of advice here. Start with your entire toolbox of competencies, but you need to connect what you do well, wait for it, what you do well with what I need. So mistake number 3 that I've seen a lot of people make is they're going on for 15 minutes about a really strong superpower they have. And I start losing them after about 3 because that superpower is not on my priority list. So they have it, they're good at it, it's useful and valuable, but it's not meeting the need of that audience or listener. So think of your competencies, think of your deliverables, and set a goal every 90 days to sit down and review what you've done in that period of time. Include your hard skills. Sometimes the best point of negotiation is, I'm of the 5% that knows how to manage Salesforce effectively. But sometimes it's your soft skills. 9 out of 10 of my 360 reviews have talked about how influential I've been as a manager. So hard and soft skills, but also currency and demand. Some people are very good at what they do, but they have been a little complacent and they slowly started to see that that skill is not in demand as much anymore. And so you lose leverage. And finally, market value. And this is where we're going to take quite a bit of time thinking about how you can have some numbers that, not just for numbers' sake, they're going to help you feel a little bit more confident in that conversation. Here are some very common, very popular places to go. Do I have a favorite? No. There's different things I look at for different things, but I'm going to give you some advice on how you can best use this information, but how you can also be cognizant that it's not the end all be all. It's not with 100% accuracy. And my old econ background is going to pull out a phrase I use again and again. It's imperfect information. We strive to get as much as we can, but it's never going to be perfect. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, has a lot of data in it. It's a deep dive when you get into it, but I want you to think a little bit about how these market numbers are going to help you scale yourself. So this is not really meant to be read. I wanted to do a couple of screenshots so you could see there are ways to filter by date. So one drawback to some of these sites will be, how old is the data? How quickly can an economic trend change a data? Skills that were high may be lower. COVID may have put in demand different skills. Look at our essential workers. Look at the supply and demand for those. So currency is going to be an issue. It goes without saying that someone working in San Francisco and someone working in Pierre, North Dakota, or somewhere that there may be a cost of living differential, that's going to be a factor that you're going to look at too. They are presented as is. They're self-reported. So salary.com, again, it can help you. What are the following factors, for example, that may influence some of you? I work in the MBA and the part-time professional programs. Will that extra degree help your salary? Is that officially in your protocols at your company, or is that unofficial? And how might that change your strategy for negotiating? So step number 1, and again, because of a lunch and learn, we're not going to dig into too deeply, but I want you to check multiple sources, because what we're looking for are patterns and broad ranges. When people, and I've seen them on YouTube, are saying, you know, you might check it, but it's useless, it's dated, it's self-reporting, it's not going to be that valuable. You need to really get into the micro and find out what those ranges are. I'm going to take a more middle of the road approach. I think it's important to look at these sources and get some general ranges so that you feel comfortable for where I'm at, for where I'm hoping to do it, for what experience and skills I have. This is a reasonable and what I call realistic range. But self-reported, it's going to have some issues. And that's why I want you to know that it's going to be imperfect information, regardless of how you slice and dice it. So what are data sources? Well, some of those will be the ones that any of you can find by Google. How do I research salaries? But I want you to think about a few other areas, because these are all complementary to getting some numbers, some patterns, and some trends down. Are you involved in professional groups? If you are, a lot of those professional groups do their own salary types of surveys. So in higher ed, I may be paid differently as the director of HR than I would be doing it for a Fortune 100. So same job, same title, but I've got some differentials in the industry that I'm using. So professional groups can work. Personal networks. So you think of all the people on your LinkedIn. You know, I love LinkedIn, and I'm a big believer that networking works, but people only think of networking as, do you have a job opening? Do you know where I can look for a job? How about that you reach out and you say, hey, you worked in this field. Are you comfortable sharing a salary range? What do you see as some of the trends? Has it been stable? Have there been micro increases? Has it taken a big jump because of demand? If you are targeting particular companies or your own organization, what's the internal organization transparency? Now, when you say imperfect information, I'm going to give you a great example here from Iowa. You know, we are a government agency, so our salaries are out there for the world to see. That's about as transparent as you can get. And so you'd be looking at someone and you'd say, oh, that person is exactly the same classification as the job I'm going for. And that person makes X amount. So would that be fair to say that should be part of your metrics? It can be, but remember, someone whose job is doing the same duties but has to do them evenings and weekends may make more than someone whose job requires them to do them 8 to 5. Any of you that have people in the medical field can know about shift differentials. It can also mean that you find someone, and this is a real story. Someone came to me and said, oh, a good friend's cousin is doing the exact job at the exact organization, and he's willing to give me her exact salary. And he shared it. She looked it up on her salary.com data and said, well, that's in the range. I'm pretty comfortable with that. Only to find out later that that person's salary was on the low end because they'd gotten subpar performance reviews. Okay, so you're thinking they're doing exactly what could be better data than that. If you went in with that number, you'd be lowballing yourself. So you'd be leaving some money on the table. So my goal for you on this part of the process is that you do a little deeper dive, you look at different data sources, and you get to some numbers. Okay, I want you to get to ultimately some numbers. So the happy face, let's start with a happy face. That's going to be a bit of your stretch salary. And if you tend to veer modest, I am going to strongly encourage you to think a little bigger and think a little bit more of that stretch. What could I get? Now, I'm not saying go nuts. I'm not saying pick something at the very top. The University of Iowa, our pay levels have scales, and you say, oh, the highest on the scale is 100,000. I'll go for 100,000. And your further investigation indicates, well, you would need to be there a long time and be more than halfway through a career path to reach those higher numbers. But think about what that information shares with you. I call it the go big or go home number. The number that if I gave it to you in a job offer or a promotion offer, you'd probably be very tempted to immediately go, yes, thank you, case closed, let's move on. Don't do that, but that's the number we're talking about. The range is going to be your more neutral, which is what range would allow some flex based on other factors. So by that, I mean, you've done your homework, you've dug into your salary sites, and you now have ranges. Now, maybe you want to keep that range big. Maybe it's a $20,000 range, but maybe you're going to look at saying, you know, I might be willing to go on the lower end if I got another week of vacation. You know, what does another week of vacation add up in dollars? Maybe I'd be willing if I could negotiate something else, but you go in pretty confident that somewhere in that range is workable. And then I do want you to think about this, and people don't. They do when they're being pretty objective, and when they're in the heat of the moment, they may not. I want you to think about a walkaway number. And a walkaway number, I think, kind of holds your self-respect. Okay, your walkaway number is, if I don't see at least X and I can't negotiate for above X, it's probably not the right job for me. Now, you might say, I might be desperate for a job. Maybe it'll offer something. You can talk about those details. But here's what I found in the HR world on the other end of things. If you come into a brand new job feeling some discouragement or disgruntlement about the process, yeah, I took the job, but it's at minimum salary, there's likely to be some issues ongoing with that. It's going to be frustrating, and it's probably better to look at what your walkaway options are. So part one is preparing for you and what you've got to offer. But I want you to look at your negotiating environment as well. You can look at internal salary ranges, but look at the financial condition of your organization. And this comes into play almost as much about timing as it does how you can use it in your negotiation. Now, you might think, common sense would say, I'm not going to try to go for something big if we're struggling financially, but that's too simplistic an approach. Do you have a unique skill that is exactly what's needed in a financial crunch? If you can parlay what you know, I know everything about online education. I can parlay that because of COVID, you need somebody with that now. You might actually be able to negotiate something because of the unique skill you have. So take it into consideration, but you're going to find me doing a lot of hedging on it may not be the only factor. Look at the overall current economy and trends for your industry. I look at a lot of MBAs and business analytics resumes, and they have been so concentrated on getting the degree and concentrated on their work and succeeding in their job. I want you to make sure your vision isn't a silo vision and that you do join those professional associations. You add on some groups in LinkedIn and you get a sense of what are the trends in my industry and what does the current economy mean for that. Think about what's going on with your competition. That, from the HR side of the table, we don't want to lose our best people to the competition. We're going to be examining those trends for the competition as well. And think of history and regulation, or perhaps I should say history and deregulation, and what that could or couldn't mean for your particular industry. So, do you know the most about what you can for that negotiating or external environment? Now, we wanted to talk a little bit about some core concepts, and I want you to think in terms of three things that are worth further exploration. One is called integrated bargaining, and that, if you look at that picture I first saw, that's the woman with her hand out, handshaking. It assumes that there's a variable amount of resources and that convergent positions can both exist. I win and you can win. If you think of distributed bargaining, that is more your whole issue of if I win, you lose, and I'm not going to be happy, and you're going to be that HR person going, I got that person for the lowest amount possible score. That's not going to win for either side. BATNA is going to give you some information that I think is going to be, your best alternatives. You want to think of alternatives. If I can't get exactly what I want, what are going to be my best alternative actions in negotiating? And active listening is one. I want to give you a source that you might want to refer back to. It's called The Muse, and they have career articles. And one I just read within a couple of weeks was active listening being one of the top 3 reasons why people succeed, grow, and are promoted in their career. And active listening is critical in negotiation. It's also going to go on a little bit of a line here. I'm not big on negotiating through email. It's nice in person. I like a Zoom, but active listening also means you're getting very experienced at looking at body language and really, in an active sense, trying to understand where the other side is coming from. So when we think about that interactive bargaining and active listening, what matters to them? So let's look at a couple quotes you might use if you were exhibiting interactive bargaining. And I come back to you as HR and go, you're our top candidate, or we'd like to give you that promotion, but we have serious budget constraints. Have you seen what's happened at our last 3 quarterly reports? And you say, because you've heard them, right? I understand about budget restraints. I want to stay as flexible as possible to work with your team. Can we further explore whether or not X dollars is possible given my skills and experience? So 3 words that I think are more integrative on that. I understand. Okay, you've heard them. Flexible and further exploration. Now, sometimes you'll find that if people have been in jobs, some of you may be in this very experience. You've been in jobs 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Compression is happening. Have any of you seen people coming in doing a job you do for $10,000 more, and you're thinking, how did this happen? I've been here, and that's what the market will bear to bring a new person in. But that's when you can say compression is a challenging issue. Keeping up with the market is a challenging issue. Is this perhaps the time that your unit, your managers, your senior HR will want to look at compression issues and how it might impact the quality of your hiring? Listen actively and with empathy. Ask what they're saying and not saying. But here's a number 2 bullet that I want you to think about. You may approach it differently. Your strategy may be different if you were talking with a screening recruiter If you are talking with HR, if you're talking with your direct manager, I'm very used to direct managers having come into me in my HR role and saying, this is the best person. We got to get the money. We got to get the money. And HR is going to be looking at the bigger picture and they're going to be saying, is that a reasonable amount or will that just release a few headaches for that particular manager? Or you may be talking at a director level. What really matters to them? Develop those lists of actions you'll take, improve on some of the promising ideas, and then select some things that you can do. Remember when I said there's a walk-away point? That may be the action that you'll need to take, but you may say, I'm going to be walking away in the next 6 months to 1 year. Until then, here's what I'm going to be doing. So let's think about those 5 points ahead of time. Researching, looking at past offers or comparable offers, social media, websites, avoiding false anchors. Anybody buying a car might understand this in car negotiation. The person that puts that first number out, that seems to be what everything else gets anchored around. So that's the reason we do our homework, so we don't have an anchor that's too low or too high. Know your salary frame, think about your alternatives, and know your market. You're going to definitely want to practice your points. Now, there's a great article called US News on Money that says the exact words to use when negotiating salary. So let's put an example up here because it really encompasses a lot of what I'd like you to take away. There are other examples that are out there. So remember, there's a lot of good information out on the web, out on YouTube's, but you're going to want to pick and choose what two things happen. Feel authentic to you and feel like they're in the best position. 80-20, 80% of the experts advise this. So there's people that say, oh, I'm disappointed in that offer. Can we get to? I'm going to prefer that you move to a different direction. I'm going to prefer that you say, I'm really excited to work here. After the interview, I've learned a lot more and I know I can bring value. I appreciate the offer. Okay, there's appreciation. They went out there, they put an offer on the table, but I'm expecting to be in the Y range based on experience and past performance. Now you could exchange that. I'm expecting to be in the Y range, or there's a series of experts that want you to pick an exact and specific number, and we won't go into it, but there's some good theory behind that as well. But what you might say, based on the market, can we look at this salary for me? So think ahead of time. When you commit and you practice, don't just say, oh, I know I'm going to have these words and I'm going to be ready for them. Think about what that means. I'm looking for a competitive offer. I'm sure we can come to an agreement later in the process. So this is for those of you that are like, oh my gosh, I have an application form that's asking me to list a range. I don't want to list a range now. They don't even know me. I don't even know them. Or it might be that first screening interview. And this is where there's some dodging going. There's a little game playing here. They want to know they're not wasting time, but you need to be hypersensitive to the fact that as soon as some of those numbers are out there, they can start developing a life of their own, and it may not be what you want. So how about using that last line? I'm sure we can come to an offer later in the process. The second one is a little bit of a variant of that. I'd like to understand more about the positions and come back to this question. How does that prove active listening? You're not just going, I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate. You know, you're not answering. And I want to come back to it, but let's find out a little bit more about the job. And here's the biggie, and the biggie that all of you should remember. Your greatest point of leverage is after you have the offer. Your greatest point of leverage is after you have the offer. Then there's going to be a lot more room to get some numbers out on the table. You might really be disappointed and you say, I had more in mind than your offer. How can we bring our numbers closer together? And a good dodge that sometimes works, although HR is trained to not answer this also, did you have a range in mind? And a good HR unit, I'm going to say good, one that wants to try to keep this conversation moving forward, they might share a range with you. The range is this, but here's a little caveat. That's the range in an ideal situation. If they can find a good pool of candidates who have the skills they need, this is the range they want. If your network has told you, you know what, did you hear Procter & Gamble has had 3 failed searches and they haven't been able to find someone with that skill? What happens to that range? It's going to bump up because they may now have, with the reality of a failed search, decided that they have to pay more in market to get what they want. We asked a lot on that why, so I want to do this very briefly, but thinking of the compounding effect when asking for a raise, anything over time means the sooner you get it, the more value. There's numbers out there that can talk about equity and pay gaps. This is a huge issue right now for HR. If you start your career with some compromising on those salaries, that can follow you for a long time. So remember, over the course of a career, $500,000 could be lost if we don't negotiate some of those smaller numbers in the early stages. Why do you want to leave money on the table? But here's what I want you to also think about. There are other areas open for negotiation, other areas that are out there. But tip, please don't jump into those before, if salary is your number one priority. I have seen people lose it. So we're in the interview and I'm saying, well, we think that it might be possible to offer remote work. Try to think pre-COVID here. It's not such a shock right now. But remote work used to be a pretty big chip. And you as the candidate are like, oh, I really want remote work. That's going to be, very attractive to me. And then we go on and on and on. And then I throw out a salary number and you're like, oh, that salary number is not as good. And you say, I'd like to go more. And I said, yeah, but you already negotiated remote work. Do you see where I'm at on that? You've laid your hand out that remote work is important. I'm not saying it's not going to come up in the conversation, but out of all these things that might be possible for negotiate, make sure you know what your priority is and seal the deal, if possible, on the base salary first. Try not to get into that other stuff until you've got it. It's like, okay, we've reached a compromise. I'm down from my number, you're up from yours. Now let's talk about some of these other issues. So when we think about education, I work with the MBAs, right? And the business analytics students part-time, the professional program. Some of them have tuition reimbursement. You might think it's a pretty rigid schedule, but we've had people that might say, can we negotiate that I can start my reimbursement immediately versus waiting 1 year into the job? So that's just a small example. You need to be creative and know what possibilities are out there. I know we're closing in on our 40 minutes, but I want to make sure we leave plenty of time. But there's some tips from the other side, or what HR recruiters want you to know. Now, it's in everybody's best interest to make it work. Duh. You're probably saying, do you really even need to put that out there? I do need to put it out there because I think that first slide of the boxing gloves and we're going to punch this out and may the better man or women win. Yeah, there's still some people out there that think that. There's still some people that really want to lowball it and find, if I can get people as cheap as possible, then I win. But the reality is we are going to have a negotiation, and all negotiations start with know what you've offered is not what I'm looking for, or know what you think you need is not what I can pay. That's only when negotiation begins. And it's in everyone's best interest to make it work. So try to look at it in terms of that conversation with active listening and integrated bargaining. The second one, HR has to keep their eye on the big picture. So you might be thinking on that discussion where we said, get your value proposition ready, get what your strengths are. You're going to go into HR and you're going to go, I've gotten outstandings on my last 3 performance reviews. That's how much my supervisor thinks of me and how important I am and my value. And inside, HR is keeping an eye on the big picture, and you don't know it, but they know that your manager has given 14 out of 15 people outstanding on their team. Because it feels good. Oh, it feels good. This is a high performing team. Everybody's outstanding. Sometimes, yes, but sometimes it's a more inexperienced manager who's not ready to have some of those hard conversations that say, you're doing a good job, but that's what we brought you in to do. You're doing a good job. But then your question back on that, so you're ready for that big picture. What do I need to do to get to that next level? What do you need to see? So when you think about your best alternatives, it might be, I have more information straight from my manager. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to send them an email summarizing it. And you can bet I'm going to hit some of those marks, and we're going to have this salary talk again. Do your homework, improve your value. I have seen HR or managers go, are we that far out of the marketplace? Oh my gosh, how come all of our academic advisors are going to engineering in the same college, in the same university? Well, they're going there because we haven't kept up on market. And so don't assume everybody's always on top of market. If you've done your homework and can prove your value, you show them numbers from 7 sources, internal professional associations, you're going to help them. And then establish those priorities. That's a big mistake. We talk about the biggest not being prepared, but part of it is just think ahead. If you have to give on some things and others you don't, communicate them effectively. Don't game people around. Don't yank their chain. If that salary is way out of range, talk about it. Make sure you know. So let's think about that summary so we've got some time for some of your questions, because again, broad sweep today. I know it's a lunch and learn. Before the conversation, it's really important that you get to your why. Know why you're doing this. If you're doing it, let me give you an example. I was in a salary negotiation with someone and I offered up a salary. And they looked at it and it was alive. They were across the desk and they said, "Oh, well, that seems reasonable, but well, I'm sorry, but I have to ask you if this is flexible because that's what I was taught in my class, that I have to ask." And I'm looking at it going, this is not a person who is coming in with confidence. And when I immediately said, "Well, it's not negotiable," it was almost like, "Oh, phew, thank you. It's not negotiable." So know your why. Know why you're going to put yourself in a somewhat uncomfortable position. And I guarantee you, know that it will be less uncomfortable the second, third, and fourth time you do it. And you will be doing it across your career. Get to your value proposition. And here's a word I want you to write down and circle: unique. Unique. The more you can draw out how you are unique, and the less you rely on your value being, "I worked 80 hours last week and I see Susan from accounting leaving at 3 o'clock every day. I deserve this raise." A, we're going to try to keep other people out of that conversation. And B, what are your unique values? And try to get some metrics and deliverables that can back that up. In fact, I even recommend write it out on a sheet. Put a little sheet together with those positives. Okay, that's your sheet. You've got it there. If you're a little nervous, you kind of have it. Like I might be a little nervous in front of all of you out there with no faces and no bodies. I'm hoping you're still there. I'm nervous, so I'm going to have it written down. And guess what then you can do with that sheet when you're done talking? Even if the end of the conversation is, "We don't know if we've got the money. Let's think about it. Let me go to HR. Let me go to my senior director and see what we can do. Here, can I leave this sheet with you so you have something?" So the HR tip, give them the ammo that helps them know how to help you. Okay. Determine the market and then determine, remember the 3 phases? What's your fantastic stretch goal? What's your range that's reasonable? Because how do we keep emotion out of the conversation? Boy, it's just the facts. It's metrics, it's numbers. Let's not get bent out of shape. Let's keep it calm and let's talk about the market and the facts. Let's not rush out of here and go, "You're not going to make it. I'm out of here. I'm going to get another job." Your brand and your professionalism are on the line too. And practice. 4 tips from the other side. We just covered those. We want it to work. Do your homework. Know that there's a big picture. And part of HR is watching out for the non-squeaky wheels, who are also exceptional performers. And some of you listening out there this noon, you're that non-squeaky wheel. You're the put my head to the grindstone and do it. You're the I am doing the 60 hours. The problem is that's less noticed and sometimes overlooked when money's being distributed. Okay. Core concepts of integrated bargaining, button and listening, tone and timing. The very same words done professionally and calmly can make a huge difference. The reason I don't use the line, "I'm disappointed in this offer," versus "I'm excited to work with you. Let's see if we can find a mutually agreeable," it's important. And timing is important. So one comment I want to have on this as we finish up. Everybody thinks about getting this already at performance review time. Now you've done your internal homework. Remember that internal bargaining environment? There are some major units at this university where all the senior managers come in to look at who's performing, how's the career pathing going for their junior managers. They've already decided. By the time you get to the performance review, they're sharing performance, but they've already started to fine tune it. Think about whether you want to have this conversation 3 months before. It's also called the halo and the horns. The people that are like, "Uh-oh, Barb, it's performance review time in 6 weeks. I better get on the gun and start doing some wonderful outcomes." Instead of thinking, "I'm going to come way away from that performance review time." But the opposite holds true too. If you have a mistake that happens and it happens close to performance review time, that's unfortunate because that's kind of what's lingering. Have these conversations and think about timing. But I said 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Well, we're at the 1. You just have to do it. The most common way people give up their power is thinking they don't have any. You do have some power, even if that power is, I've done the best negotiating I can do. I'm not reaching my not walk away point. I need to start thinking hard, mentoring, reaching out to people in the field I trust to imagine what my next career step is going to look like. So Barb, let's close here and let me have a breath. I can certainly talk fast, but we got some good stuff in there. Do we have some questions?
We do have questions. We have quite a few questions, and I encourage anybody else, if you do have a question, please go to that Q&A button and type your question in. So in reviewing these, there's 2 questions that are really similar. So I'm going to kind of try to lump them together. And it has to do with people whose job descriptions are unique, or that they cover a lot of different roles, like they're not just an accountant per se. And how do you find and research salary ranges when you have, or you're going for an unusual job that isn't just, you know, I'm an accountant or I'm a finance manager, but, you know, I'm a fine example. I handle communications, but I also handle alumni relations and collegiate relations and whatever else the dean asked me to do, right? How do I find a salary? How do I look at salary ranges when my work is different, unique? It's a combination of different jobs put together.
Yeah, that is a solid question. And it may be that you reorder slightly the order of your different methods of market research. So remember how I started with let's go big and then narrow down to get more specific? In this case, Barb, what you might do is go out to your professional association. Go out to people that, you know, think about the percentage of your time in each of those tasks. You know, if they're exactly 50-50, I'm going to assume something's a little more like 70-30. Go to the 70%, look at your professional network, reach out and go, you know, 70% is doing this. Seems to be the range I see when I, you know, think about that range, but I'm also doing this. So question number 1, how unique is that combination of skills? So if we have somebody who is fantastic tactically, but also has demonstrated strong strategic skills, you are in a more unique position than, well, I can do this, and on the side, I can also do that because I did it in my last job. So you have a blending of jobs, but they aren't necessarily of the same scope or the same skill level. So talk to some people in your network and start getting some ideas. Find out if it is that unique. Go out on one of your boards and say, you know, I find my job is split between these 2 things. Are there others out there that have combined jobs? You're not saying you're doing it for salary. You're just looking to find a peer group that can give you some better basis of information. And finally, which part of that job seems to be recognized and rewarded the most? And how can you then use that strategically to highlight that unique value proposition that you have?
Great, thank you so much. So Dee, the one thing, let's stop sharing your screen so we can just see you as you answer.
Oh, that's kind of scary. That's kind of scary.
Although that's a lovely picture of campus, and we all love to see campus.
That's
and
right.
then you get to see those great bullets.
And then I get the stats on the back, yeah.
So there's a couple of questions here as well about imbalances between external hires and internal promotions. How do you navigate that? As well as there's kind of a similar question that has to deal with when you see others in your same unit or same area that are paid higher than you are. You know, what if you're the non-squeaky wheel, as you talked about, you know, so those are kind of sort of, you know, similar in that, you know, you might be that internal person and you see these external hires coming in at a higher range. How do you navigate those types of situations?
Yeah, they can be complicated. So let's start with one of the biggies that I think is important for you to determine, and that is who's going to make the final decision. So if you hear no at an early stage, that could really mean no doubt about it. Or it could mean no, I haven't really looked into it, but no, I just think no. And that question, again, politely, professionally, tactfully, might be, is there another level of of administration that we could talk to, because I think I have a value proposition to hand that makes it worthwhile for us to look at upping the salary. So that question is, who is really the decision maker? Doesn't mean that, you get on your email and you call the CEO and you say, you're the big decision maker, so will you hire me? But it's more, is there another layer that says 85% of the time the answer would be no? But guess what you uncover? 15% of the time, you've now given us some important information. So let me circle back. Maybe I'm seeing a gender gap, Barb. Maybe what you've brought to the table is something that has some legal ramifications, or I'm simply just seeing that there's been way too much compression and we've reached a critical point. And who's bringing that critical point? Someone else. The flip side of that, and that's kind of sounding positive, right? We can still look at who the decision maker is and who can go on and imagine. But remember that example of, salaries might be different. So do I want to hear that message of, well, Dee, your salary is different than somebody you're working next to?
All right.
Now, HR is probably not going to reveal personnel information, but you kind of have to do a little bit of this hard questioning because, I'll date myself here a little bit. It's not like woebegone and we're all above average. We're not all above average, and we need to find our fit so that we can excel and our superpowers that we can use. But some of it is simply that hard lesson of your managers being asked to say, on an otherwise high functioning team, we want to keep the people that are providing the most value. And you need to decide, is it my turn? Turn is an awful word, but have I now waited, developed, had the patience, gotten good communications with my manager? And if I've reached all those goals and I still feel that I've hit that dead end, as a career coach, I'm probably going to advise that you think about where your other options may be. A counter offer showing that someone else is interested in you might be a factor. And I'm not saying play that game, but we would talk about that.
So are there differences when you're negotiating for a salary in a new job in comparison to negotiations for a raise?
Well, there's two things. I think when you're negotiating for the raise, you're going to be dealing with two factors that you need to look at. What is your brand image in that current job? So how are you identified? Are you the go-to person, or are you the person that might be the best person in XYZ skill, but a 30-year teen can't stand working with you? So you've got this odd combination. So internally, they're going to know more about you, and you're going to know more about them. How can you leverage that? And how can you get accurate information that will help you? So a key lifelong skill, constructive criticism, and how best to use it. The flip side on the entry level is you have the leverage of also saying, I'm probably interviewing with other places. There's a possibility that I have other job offers somewhere along or in the process. And that employer, much to your surprise, it might be that I'd love that offer, but what's our timeline? Because I am very serious about 3. You are in the top 3, but I want to be very deliberate and very intentional in my choice of offers. So can we extend that line? So a lot of the similarities are there. Is it market? Is it not market? But here's the other things to think about as somebody coming in new. Are you developing new skills? Are you working for a manager that will support you? Are some of the other non-base negotiables worth it? I'm getting stock equity in an up and coming, and my research in the industry is this is only going to get higher and higher. So what are those other factors, and how will that make a difference? Whereas once you're in, you're looking at, is this where I can continue to grow my career? What's my brand? Can I change my image? A really interesting article, Barb, I read. I think you might resonate with this a little bit. They said, here are some key danger points in a career. Watch out for these. You might know the obvious one. I'm not being current. I'm not staying current. I'm not staying up on my job. Here's one. You're too indispensable to your manager. How could that be a career killer? Isn't that what we all aspire to, is being too indispensable? Well, what's the brand image we talked about? They see you in that role and they love it there. One of my current students, we've talked a lot about that. They like what I'm doing and they need to see me in a different light. Maybe it's leaving to do it. Maybe it's getting another offer, but realize that once you're in that company, you're working with your brand and the inside information you have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, now here is one, and a couple of people have mentioned this, and it has to do, and you did talk about it, about the when you're asked about a range. And some people feel like I may give them a range of I need to make between X and X, and they're always going to pick the lower number.
Mhm.
Or are you limiting yourself? Should you go high? Or, sometimes you fill out those forms and you can't, like you had some great verbiage for, other ways to discuss that if you're talking to a person. But now there's a lot of applying for a job that you're not applying with a person. You're having to fill in a number into a form.
Yeah.
What do you do, in all these situations where they really are pushing you for
Yeah.
an actual range
Yeah.
or a
Yeah.
number?
Yeah. I mean, I hate it. I hate it because there's not a perfect answer. And so one thing is, what is your risk comfort level? Okay. I would probably, if forced, let's say it's an application form, Barb, and it's a pull down and you can't, it has an asterisk by it. You can't dodge it. Go with a slightly higher range. So you're in your mid zone, but don't go with your lowest number in your mid zone. Don't go with the lowest number. Go a little higher than that. Go up, a good 20% beyond that. And then anywhere there's an open box for comments, salary negotiable, flexible on salary, depending on, this is some important verbiage, depending on the whole package. Because we get so tuned into that salary, that's a piece of the package. If you got your MBA paid for and you got 2 extra weeks of vacation and you ended up getting, supplied with your car and all of these things, add that up and see, hey, that might balance out to not the highest point. But I'm going to suggest if there isn't an asterisk and you can leave it blank, I'm usually willing to accept the risk of leaving it blank because the problem is it's too darn early in the conversation. Now you're talking to that recruiter. They're like, don't waste our time. Barb, you want to hire me? We want to get on. I don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste my time. You still might try to say, can we just revisit this after we know a little more? Because you might hear about some great benefits and you might adjust your range a little bit. You might have also just gotten no letters from the last 3 jobs that you tried to go for, and they're no longer in the running. Are you going to shift your range maybe a little bit? Now, we want to be careful because settling is never a strategy, but we are also realistic in this world. If you need to put food on the table and take care of expenses, you might adjust your range. So if you're asked, you would say, I know the market range is very wide from X to Y, but I'd really rather talk about my position in that range later on. Now, what's the dodge that gives you? They're like, oh, Barb, you mentioned da da da. So we're going to go with da, the low number. Let's just say the number. You mentioned 65 to 85,000. You mentioned it. And here's your comeback. I mentioned that as market range. But as I see how important my skills in this will be for this organization, I'd like to negotiate that my value is actually at the upper range. So
Great.
practice those things, though. They do not come naturally. Add nerves, add pressure, add desperation, add anger. Okay, anger can be an emotion that comes out in some of these. Distill all that down and do some practicing.
Great. Well, thank you, Dee. I have to say that is, you've provided a lot of fodder, a lot of content. We have lots of questions that we're just not going to get to, I'm afraid, but it kind of shows that this is definitely something on everybody's mind. So again, I want to thank you, Dee, for taking the time today. I think that, you have provided a lot of information to us. Now, everyone, you should know that our program today has been recorded and we hope to share a link with you as well. Dee, we have had a couple of people wonder if you would be willing to share your slides.
Oh, absolutely. And also, 3 things that I would go for now. I would definitely go to the book called Getting to Yes to work on some negotiation. I would look on some of the YouTubes, if only to see what are the points of view and perspective. But remember, Throw 10 HR people in a room and 9 of us will have a different opinion. So if you hear any one person say this is the only way to do it, run for your life. Run for your life. Kind of amalgamate and find your middle ground. And finally, just start asking your mentors what's reasonable. What is my career making good progress? What changes might I need to make? People get all excited about their careers at the time of a job search and then move into complacency. So I'm just going to strongly encourage you, keep that eye on your path, and happy to have had an opportunity out in Hawkland to visit with so many of you. And I hope you found it a worthwhile use of your hour today.
Well, I think there are many people who are saying thanks in the chat and are very appreciative of you taking the time. Now, for our attendees, I just want to let you know that when we end, you will actually get a survey very quickly that will just ask you to rate our event from 1 to 5. I encourage you to please do so. Gives us kind of a feel for what is resonating with our audience, so we'd appreciate that. And don't forget to sign up for those other events. Now,
please do.
The Tippie College alumni page is just tippie.uiowa.edu/alumni. And if you go to that page, you will see, our career webinars and other webinars as well. So always feel free to do that. Again, all of our webinars are free and open to the public. We welcome you to attend. In addition, we tend to send an email out after the fact that will have that link for you. And if you want to see some of our past webinars, they are on the Tippie College's YouTube page, and you'll find a link to this event. But if you want to see those other things, if you want to see the great presentation that was done on how to improve your LinkedIn profile, or how to have a difficult conversation, those are all available to you on our YouTube page, and you can just Google that. Just Google Tippie College YouTube, and you'll find us. So again, thank you for all attending. Dee, thank you for your expertise. And on behalf of the Tippie College of Business, we want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. And as always, go Hawks.
Go
Thanks,
Hawks.
everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.